You see a political plan coming into it. Tecumseh is saying we can use this movement to reunify this broken people, the Shawnees, which was a long desired dream of Shawnee leaders, was to bring this scattered tribe together, make them of consequence again.
In the spring of 1806, the two brothers took their first decisive step. Eager to establish a center for the new movement and to reassert the Shawnee claim to homelands already ceded by treaty, they moved their village to a new site in western Ohio, on the American side of the line established by the Treaty of Greenville 10 years earlier, in open defiance of the American government. Then sent out messengers to villages across the region, often led by Tecumseh himself.
The Shawnees have heretofore been scattered about in parties, which we have found has been attended with bad consequences. We are now going to gather them all together to one town, that one chief may keep them in good order and prevent sickness, want, and shame from coming among them.
Initially, Tecumseh remains in the prophet's shadow. We know that he's aware of his brother's transformation. We know that the brother lives in, quote, Tecumseh's village, but it is the prophet that first attracts the tribal people to the village.
From the start, the new movement sent shockwaves surging through Indian country, unsettling native communities already rocked by decades of change, and deeply dividing the Shawnees themselves, along with other worn-down tribes like the Delawares and the Wyandots.
The Shawnee chiefs in Ohio saw power struggling. Straight away they saw this is a man from the junior division of the Shawnees bidding for power, and we're not going to give it to him.
Even within Tecumseh's own nation, there are Shawnees who are now trying to follow the white man's path, who are following the lead of Blackfoot, who is a person who had fought against the Americans through the Revolution up until the Treaty of Greenville, but now as an older man is saying, we fought, we've tried that way, it's not working, we need to try this way.
In April 1806, eager to win more recruits from among the troubled tribes in Ohio and Indiana, Tenskwatawa issued a direct challenge to any leaders who opposed him, accusing them of witchcraft and of being in league with the U.S. government.
He essentially engaged in a series of high-profile confrontations with their leaders to the point where he enters into a Wyandot village and engages in a ritualized killing of a Wyandot leader. He essentially accused him and others like him of being a witch, of attempting to undermine them by acting as a kind of wedge for Americans to enter their communities and harm their people. And so people begin to see him as an iconoclast of sorts, who's willing to take on government chiefs who are in the pay of the United States, and his message spreads like wildfire as a result.
In late April, as a wave of fear and unease rippled through white communities in
terror.
the territorial governor, William Henry Harrison, fired off a letter to the Delawares, denouncing the Shawnee prophet as an impostor and urging them to put his supposed powers to the test.
My children, who is this pretended prophet who dares to speak in the name of the great Creator? Examine him. Demand of him some proof, at least, of his being a messenger of the deity. If he's really a prophet, ask him to cause the sun to stand still, the moon to alter its courses, the river to cease to flow, or the dead to rise from their graves. If he does these things, you may believe he is sent from God. Otherwise, drive him from your town, and let peace and harmony prevail amongst you.
And in June 1806, the Shawnee prophet predicts an eclipse of the sun called a black sun by the Shawnees, which is a sign of great things to come, a sign of great change. And at first, many Shawnees, many other Indians said, all this time, I don't really think he's able to do it.
Did I not speak the truth? See now, the sun is dark.
And the eclipse was so complete that the farm animals, for example, went into the sheds, the birds roosted, etc. And the prophet's stock after this just rose like a skyrocket. William Henry Harrison could not have done anything that helps the prophet and propels the prophet and Tecumseh to a position of prominence more than issuing this challenge.
As news of the miracle spread, the trickle of pilgrims coming into Greenville swelled to a flood. By July, Ojibwe villages on the shores of Lake Superior stood empty and deserted. To the south, Potawatomis left corn crops standing in the fields and came to hear the Shawnee holy man, whose words now, with each passing month, seemed to grow in stridency and power.
My children, the Great Spirit bids me say to you thus: have very little to do with the Americans. They are unjust. They have taken away your lands which were not made for them. The whites I have placed on the other side of the great water to be another people separate from you. In time, I will overturn the land so that all the white people will be covered. And you alone shall inhabit the land.
And the U.S. government panics, and the fear really proliferates. Because by 1807, certainly, I think most Americans just assumed an orderly process of dispossession and conquest in which Native Americans would gradually recede from the picture or assimilate into American society. And when Tenskwatawa has his vision, all of a sudden 10 years of confidence erodes as Native people reconsider and attempt to reorganize themselves in an effective way against Jefferson's vision of land loss and dispossession.
Now events began to accelerate. In the spring of 1807, the Indian agent at Fort Wayne, William Wells, alarmed by the upturning Indians passing through his outpost, accused the prophet of keeping settlers in a continual state of uneasiness, he said, and demanded he leave Greenville. That June, convinced that English agents operating out of Canada were egging the Indians on to war, William Henry Harrison fired off a letter to the Secretary of War. I really fear, he wrote, that this said prophet is an engine set to work by the British for some bad purpose. In the fall of 1808, as the War of Words grew louder, the two brothers decided to move their center of operations to a new site, 150 miles west, strategically located near the junction of the Wabash and Tippecanoe rivers, deep in Indiana territory. Far away from prying white eyes, they hoped, and closer to the western tribes that had been most receptive to the prophet's message to begin with. The new village, called Prophetstown, would rise to become one of the greatest centers of Indian resistance on the North American continent. It would also become a major obstacle to the dreams of statehood nurtured by William Henry Harrison, who in 1809 redoubled his efforts to drive the Indians from Indiana, bribing local chiefs into signing away lands over which they had no authority, and pressing one land cession after another through the territorial legislature, culminating in the notorious Treaty of Fort Wayne in the autumn of 1809.
The Treaty of Fort Wayne really changes everything, and the politics comes to the fore. here's 3 million acres of Indian land suddenly snatched away, and white settlements are moving closer than ever before to Prophet's Town. And suddenly there is a need for a very urgent political action.
For Tecumseh, it was the decisive moment. Convinced now that only the most radical and concerted efforts could save the Indian land base, he stepped out from behind his brother's shadow once and for all, and sprang into action. In the months and years to come, rallying warriors from half a continent to his cause, he would do everything he could to push back and redraw the still fluid boundaries of the new United States, and to create a permanent Indian homeland in the very heart of the country, bounded by the Ohio River to the south and east, by the Great Lakes to the north, and by the Mississippi River to the west, a united Indian States of America within the United States.
Tecumseh's vision is to establish, I think, what I would call cultural and physical space for Indian people. He understands that for Indian culture to survive, and for Indian independence to survive, there needs to be a land base, and that land base can only be preserved and protected by a united tribal resistance. This is no longer a fight that can be waged by just some Shawnees, just some Delawares, just some Wyandots. He's appealing to a larger pan-Indian future in which the future of all Indian peoples will be affected by the stand that Indian peoples take now.
They have driven us from the sea to the lakes, and we can go no farther. They have taken upon themselves to say, this tract of land belongs to the Miamis and this to the Delaware, and so on. Our father tells us that we have no business on the Wabash, that the land belongs to other tribes. But the Great Spirit intended it to be the common property of all the tribes. Nor can it be sold without the consent of all.
In 1809, Tecumseh set out with an entourage of warriors and interpreters on the first of a series of epic tours. East to the Shawnees and Wyandots in Ohio, west to the Saxon Foxes and Ho-Chunks in Illinois, south to the Creeks and Choctaws in Alabama and Georgia, and north as far away as Canada to the home of the Senecas and the Iroquois and the British, determined to swell the ranks of the burgeoning Indian Confederacy any way he could, and to find supplies and reinforcement for the armed conflict he now knew was inevitable.
He doesn't pluck this confederacy out of nowhere. He just tries to revive the confederacy he had known as a young man. He even uses the same terminology. The idea that the land is held in common by Indians. No one tribe can cede it without the permission of rulers, and therefore it's in all our interest to defend it. Now, this was a job that was much more difficult than the job of the American founding fathers, who at least had some tradition of common origin and a similar language and a similar thought patterns and mindset. On top of those problems that Tecumseh was facing the fact that these groups, they were fragmented villages. So he couldn't just convince a few chiefs and hope that was going to do the business for him. Those chiefs might have almost no or little authority within their own community. But this lack of authority in Indian communities both played against him and for him, because even if the chiefs were in opposition, he could pull the warriors from underneath them by appealing to them. And this is really one of his strategies.
Listen, my people. The past speaks for itself. Where today the Pequots? Where the Narragansett? The Powhatan? Okanokas? And many other once powerful tribes of our race? Look abroad. over this once beautiful country. And what do you see?